Yeah, the last time I tried to do it without Fran, it did not record, and therefore we ended up with no record of Bill Flint's knife making. With that, I'm Jordan Becker. I'm the class secretary for the class of 1982, which most of you probably know at this point. I wanted to welcome you all to our November 82 Together Online, which will be focusing on STEM issues. Hopefully will not be it'll be the first one we did focusing on STEM issues, hopefully not the last. And so we have a panel of distinguished classmates who will be talking, but we're going to start off by introducing Rodney Priestley, who is the Pomeroy and Betty Perry Smith Professor of Chemical and Biological Engineering. And he's a leading researcher in the area of complex materials. And I'm reading this, yes, the process. And is Princeton University's Vice Dean for Innovation. Dean Priestley serves as the Associate Director of the Princeton Center for Complex Materials and is the Director of Graduate Studies for the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering. He's the Faculty Co-Director for the newly created Presidential Postdoctorate Research Fellows Program aimed at enhancing diversity and addressing underrepresentation across campus, and is the Faculty Advisor to the National Society of Black Engineers Student Chapter. He is also affiliated with the Princeton Institute for Science and Technology of Materials. Dean Priestley joined Princeton as an assistant professor in 2009 after completing a postdoctoral fellowship at a school in France whose name I will not attempt to pronounce. He can do it if he wants. He received a PhD in chemical engineering in 2008 from Northwestern and his BS in chemical engineering from Texas Tech in 2003. He is also the recipient of many honors and awards, which I won't embarrass him by detailing at this point, but which you can easily find on his Princeton bio page. And if you are watching this STEM session, you probably don't need this history major to explain to you how to do that. So why don't we start off with Dean Priestley.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jordan, for the kind introduction, as well as the invitation for myself and my colleague, who will be introduced later, Colleen Burrus, to come and share a few words with everyone about our office and the things that we do. Just one very minor correction, so it doesn't seem that I'm everywhere all the time here at Princeton. I'm no longer the Director of Graduate Studies, in my department, thankfully, but still support the graduate students in the department as much as I possibly can. And so, as you alluded to, myself and Colleen, we are representing the Office of the Dean for Research here at Princeton. And for many of you, you may know when the office started. The office was voted on by the Board of Trustees and approved in 2006. And the first Dean for Research was appointed to Princeton in 2007. And the current Dean for Research is a colleague of mine in Chemical and Biological Engineering, Professor Pablo de Benedetti, who's had the role now, I believe, for the past 6 years, if I may recall. And so we have broad responsibility in the Office of the Dean for Research for nurturing and supporting the entire university's research, innovation, and entrepreneurship structure, as well as ecosystem. The office does many things, including helping faculty members find research funding and external partnerships, whether or not they be in industry, foundations, or government. We also have access to resources that allow us to seed new research collaborations and new projects between Princeton faculty members across campus, but also between Princeton faculty members and their colleagues outside of campus, again, whether or not they be within government, industry, or foundations. The Office of the Dean for Research also has responsibility of intellectual property and patent rights, as well as technology transfer across the university, and then also responsibility for making sure that research at Princeton happens in a responsible and ethical manner, and therefore setting research policy and agenda broadly. Again, in terms of thinking about these activities, we do this not only for the faculty, we do this with graduate students, postdocs, as well as undergraduates, and increasingly providing support to the broader research infrastructure beyond the campus walls. This discussion here specifically on STEM research. We're extremely proud of the STEM research that takes place at Princeton. It's extremely vibrant. We think it's world class and certainly central to the university's mission. We think this past fall was, one can argue, an ideal representation of the level and rigor of research at Princeton in the STEMs, in which we were graced with not one but 2 Nobel Prizes in the same year, one in physics and one in chemistry. My colleagues, Suki Manabi and Dave McMillan in chemistry. And I think those 2 Nobel Prizes can really highlight how universities operate in research and how Princeton is embracing these 2 types of, I would say, operations. The work in which my colleague Suki was recognized for in the Nobel Prize was research that was actually started at Princeton in the 60s. So this tells you how far out in advance an academic institution actually allows one to actually undertake research, in which you have the ability to do things that may not actually have significant benefit or actually see recognition until 30, 40 years down the road. But in the opposite case, my colleague Dave McMillan in chemistry is being recognized for work he only did 15 years ago. And so you can see here the timelines are dramatically different, but academia is an environment in which you can be doing research in which the outlook can be 30, 40 years down the road, and also research in which the outlook can be only 5 to 10 years removed. And so I think it's a very unique environment, is one in which Princeton is extremely embracing in terms of allowing for, I would say, very basic and fundamental research in which the application is not known at the time in which the work is being done, all the way to use-inspired research where the motivation for the work that is actually being undertaken has a direct application or link to it. Now, funding remains extremely vibrant at Princeton. Again, my colleague Colleen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe currently on an annual basis, research expenditures at Princeton reach upwards to about 400 million per year. This includes research that takes place at Princeton Plasma Physics Lab as well. There are about 200 invention disclosures submitted every year to the Office of Technology Licensing, and about 100 patents that are submitted every year as well. And so right now at Princeton, there are several initiatives that are underway that are connected to STEM, and I just like to highlight a few of them. One of them is the Princeton Catalysis Initiative, or PCI for short. This is an initiative that's actually run by Dave McMillan. This is, I would say, something fairly unique to Princeton, in which the university has made a significant commitment to fostering research collaborations across different divisions on campus, as well as research collaborations between Princeton faculty members and industry partners. And in the 3 years since the Princeton Catalysis Initiative has been up and running, it's something that's led out of chemistry. It has sponsored upwards to about 150 different research projects across campus that connects at least 2 faculty members from different departments together to hopefully do research at the interface and hopefully uncover new insights, new ideas, and as Dave liked to say, maybe even create a new field. Another large initiative at Princeton right now in the STEM area is bioengineering. The bioengineering initiative is, again, run out of the School of Engineering. It's currently being led by my colleague, Cliff Brangwin, also in chemical and biological engineering. The bioengineering initiative, while it may be focused within the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, most certainly touches many other disciplines in the natural sciences as well. And as currently stated, the initiative will be hiring faculty here very soon. And if you've taken a look at the Princeton website recently and looked at the new plans for the new School of Engineering, which is almost currently underway in construction, in the first phase, there will be a new bioengineering building that will be constructed that will not host what we hope to be a bioengineering initiative, but bioengineering institute. And so we're extremely excited that the institute will be part of the first phase of the new engineering buildings that will be going up in the next few years. Perhaps the last initiative I will touch upon is the quantum initiative. Princeton University has tremendous strengths in quantum sciences, whether or not they're being led through electrical engineering or through the physics department. Bringing those two groups together via our Materials Institute has really led to world-class research in quantum and fairly substantial and sizable grants through the Department of Energy and Defense that Princeton will be leading connected to quantum. And so two of these initiatives I've highlighted come out of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And so I think it's probably important for me to note that Princeton has, I still say, new Dean of Engineering, but she's been here for about a year, Dean Andrea Goldsmith, who joined us after spending about 22 years in the ELE department at Stanford University. And so we're extremely excited to have her leading the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences for us. And so as Jordan noted in my introduction, I'm the Vice Dean for Innovation in the Office of the Dean for Research. And in fact, this is a newly created position. And so I'm honored to be serving in this role as the inaugural Vice Dean for Innovation. And this is a role that I would say was created to really allow the university to further merge its rigorous research with relevance to applications. And so somewhere around, I believe 2015, the Board of Trustees published their report on Princeton and entrepreneurship. And out of that report led to several new initiatives. One was the creation of the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council, and the other was the creation of the Princeton Innovation Center Biolabs, which is our 30,000 square foot incubator space about 3 miles away from campus. That really led to, I said, step growth and activity on campus in innovation and entrepreneurship. And a few years ago, the university recognized that they needed someone to help continue to grow efforts in this area, and hence the creation of my position in the Office of the Dean for Research. And so we're extremely thrilled to be serving the campus community in this way. The position, I would say, is both inward facing and outward facing in terms of our initiatives and priorities and the programs that we are developing to support greater innovation and entrepreneurial activity within Princeton. And so by creating this position, what the Office of the Dean for Research effectively did was create a unified structure on campus, again, where we now house research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And we can think about that continuum in a whole and think about developing support that allow people to traverse that entire pipeline or come in where they see fit. And so one of the larger initiatives we've developed that we're extremely excited about is something that my colleague Colleen will be speaking about. This is our Engage conference. And so with that, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to hear a few words about what we do in the Office of the Dean for Research and some initiatives that we are extremely excited about. And so I will hand it back over to Jordan.
Thank you, Dean Priestley. And we will have an opportunity for questions. I think we should have maybe Colleen do her discussion first, and then we can have you ask both of them questions. I'm going to give you my introduction for Colleen, which came off of her website. Hopefully it's more accurate than Dean Priestley's website. And so here we go. Colleen Burrus is a member of Princeton University's Dean for Research Leadership Team. As a Director of Corporate Engagement and Foundation Relations, Ms. Burrus advances the mission of the university by leading efforts to develop strategic and innovative research collaborations with external partners. She's also the chairperson for Engage 2021, which I will let her discuss rather than me trying to make something up. Prior to Princeton, Ms. Burrus had leadership roles in both government and higher education, including at Northwestern University, University of Chicago, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the St. Louis County government. So with that, let me turn it over to Colleen Burrus.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting us to come talk with you today. So yes, I am the Engage 2021 conference. This is the second annual Innovation and Entrepreneurship Conference. And this was Rod's idea. So if it all goes wrong, we're all blaming it on Rod. It's part of the university's efforts, as Rod was talking about, to focus and nurture and highlight the things that we're doing on campus, a way to learn and connect across a variety of different domains. So I will just, again, briefly go over what we're doing this year in the conference. So we have several interwoven themes this year. So we have sessions highlighting external research collaborations with industry and government and nonprofit organizations, including how the university is working very closely with the New Jersey innovation ecosystem, particularly Choose New Jersey Economic Development, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, and the governor's office. We also have several faculty members that will be discussing their transformational research, and this is ranging from wireless technology to AI and machine learning and bioengineering. As Rod mentioned, Cliff Branglin is leading that effort. We also have a session coming out of the Anlinger Center for Energy and the Environment on decarbonizing transportation. And we have a session on advancing cancer research that is coming out of the Ludwig Cancer Branch, which you may have heard about. That was launched this past year and is being led by Josh Rabinowitz. And that's a collaboration also with Rutgers University. So again, you'll hear there's other research sessions, but those are some of the highlights. Also, sessions not to be missed are focused on entrepreneurship. And we have one session that focuses on faculty that their research have resulted in spin-outs. So we have 4 different faculty members talking about that. And I'm surprised that Rod did not mention this in his remarks, but we have a newly announced Northeast I-Core Hub. And there will be a session talking about the I-Core Hub. Yes, it's very exciting. And I seriously, when Rod stopped talking, I'm like, he did not mention I-Core. This is very, very unusual for him. Not to call you out, Rod, but here we are. So the conference opens on December 1st, and you'll see my face opening the conference. And then Rod will be sitting down with the editor of ROINJ, a newspaper, to talk about the state of innovation at Princeton. So you actually are getting a little bit of a preview beforehand. Right after Rod talks, then we will hear from, I keep saying new Dean Andrea Goldsmith. I think it's because 2020 didn't exist for most of us. So Dean Andrea Goldsmith will be sitting down with Naveen Verma, who is the director of the Keller Center, to talk about how the School of Engineering is a catalyst in the innovation ecosystem. Also, we're thrilled to have as one of our keynotes, and I'm super excited about this, is tech pioneer Marion Croak, who's the class from the class of 77. She is one of the first Black women to be inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And she'll be sitting down with a conversation with Professor Jen Rexford, who is chair of computer science. And then two other things I want to highlight that will be at the conference. Dean for Research, Pablo Di Benedetti, will present the award for distinguished innovation to a Princeton professor. And I'm hopeful that announcement of who that professor will be out tomorrow in a news article, but I can't talk about it until then. And then the conference concludes with the 13th annual Celebrate Princeton Innovation, which is a showcase of faculty ideas and ventures. And normally we had that Celebrate Princeton Innovation in person. It was a great gathering, and obviously all of this is going to be online again this year. So I hope that you can join us for all or some of the conference, and I will please encourage you to share this widely in your network. It's free. It doesn't have to be affiliated with Princeton, and I will drop the link to the conference in the chat. And again, happy to answer any questions about any of the sessions or why we're doing this or really anything. So thanks.
Thank you, Colleen. I appreciate it. And it sounds interesting even to a non-technically inclined person such as myself.
Neither am I. I just play one on TV, so all good.
That's good. So we will open this up for some questions from the audience. What I'd ask you to do, please, is start by raising your hand with the hand raising button. And if you can figure that one out, we'll start with that. If people have questions, we have one. Susan, unmute yourself and have at it.
I think my question is actually for both Colleen and for Rod. So one of the, not every faculty member is interested in creating a startup. That in itself is another thing that we could talk about and how Princeton counts that in terms of tenure and promotion. But my focus is actually on those many faculty who actually don't really enjoy their research and recognize the translational importance of what they're doing. How does Princeton help connect them with potential licensing partners? Because I think that is often left to the faculty member to find those ideal partners. And yet Princeton could play such an important role in highlighting the visibility of the intellectual property that's coming from the faculty and finding those partners. But that dance is done differently on each campus. I'm curious how Princeton's handling it.
You want me to start, Colleen, and then?
Sure, you can start and I'll jump in.
Excellent, great. So I'll let maybe Colleen speak from the point of view of corporate engagement, foundation relations, and I'll speak for some of our colleagues who are not here in the Office of Technology Licensing, in which in that office, we do have licensing specialists that cover all of the divisions on campus and who work directly with faculty members to try and help connect them with industry partners who may wish to license their technology. I would say in the past, it may have been reactive out of that office. I would say now, and even in my own personal experience, it is very much a proactive situation in which the staff and technology licensing sit down with faculty members to better understand the IP, put together a very brief kind of marketing document, and actively go out and try and find potential industry partners who would like to license the technology. Another thing I failed to mention in 2015, after the entrepreneurship report came out, is that Office of Technology Licensing also hired someone in the who's called a New Ventures Associate, who not only helps faculty members who want to spin out new ventures, but he also helps faculty members in terms of licensing technologies to existing startups as well. And so he also helps in that capacity also.
Just two things that I will add. I want to say it was four years ago now, we are part of a New Jersey-wide database called Research with New Jersey, and we have a section that's Research with Princeton that it's open to anybody, and to focus on industry. So that list all of our researchers in STEM, so the natural sciences divisions, engineering, and some in social sciences. In addition to the research, we also have our technologies as part of that database that's searchable. So we really want to, again, push that out there. The other thing that we do, and I was just at this last week, is the Edison Patent Awards that are put up by the Research and Development Council of New Jersey. And so we ensure that we nominate faculty to those awards, and we've been very successful in getting them recognized and winning those awards. And so at this gala, this award ceremony, you have a lot of industry partners in the room, and there's a great way to build connections. So we, again, try to get their technologies out there and also the research that they're doing, like previous research as well as research that's happening right now. So a lot of that one-on-one connection.
Does that answer your question, Susan? You're good with that? Okay.
Definitely. Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for either of our representatives from Princeton University? Oh, I see a question. Bruce, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, I always wonder about how the undergraduates experience these programs. So undergraduates previously have had the opportunity to work with faculty members on specialized papers. And now perhaps undergraduates can directly relate to the notion of entrepreneurship. And I'm wondering, when you refer to this spectrum of fitting in at research or innovation or entrepreneurship, how that translates for undergraduates.
Sure, thank you. Really good question. So again, overall, the office is responsible for the entire university support for research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. The one thing I will say is we are an administrative unit. We are not an academic unit. And so on a day-to-day basis, we don't interact as much with any of the constituents that we serve. I would say we're much more behind the scenes. And so, many of the ways in which, we support undergraduate students would be via academic units that actually directly engage with undergraduates, say, for instance, through the Keller Center in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. We provide a lot of the support for those programs. And in particular, I'd like to highlight a new program out of the Keller Center, which is called Prospect Student Ventures, which is a new student organization that came to us, seeking support to be able to create a student-run educational / VC type program on campus. And so we were able to provide the support, the financial support for that group, but then also help to allow the group to be housed in the Keller Center, for instance. And so that's typically how we would directly engage with undergraduate students or graduate students in general, as well by supporting other groups. But many of the programs that we've developed are certainly open to undergraduate students, whether or not it's the I-Corps program that will be launching soon, as my colleague Colleen mentioned, or say an advanced undergraduate student may be able to participate in some of the boot camps and entrepreneurship that we have also developed here on campus. But we've made it, or I made it, kind of a mandate to meet with the E-Club at least once a month, as well as the students of Prospect Student Ventures, to make sure that they feel as if they are part of the larger ecosystem that we are developing here. And actually, in fact, later next week, one of the conversations we're going to be having is how do we set up a structure in which it becomes easy for startups who are looking for undergraduate students to do internships over the summer to actually do that and make that happen.
Just as a follow-up, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time working in content development, and I could picture, and also I have this occasional role as an alumni interviewer, and I could picture the value of a compendium which focuses on interesting questions that are unanswered that faculty believe are worth addressing, and some brief squib to indicate what would be required in order to go in the direction of starting to address those questions. And if that were possible to organize, it might be quite inspiring for undergraduates who have the initiative to try to address those.
Definitely.
There's a question in the chat, which is, I guess, a follow-up from Susan. Will the I-Corps Hub have undergraduate engagement?
Senior undergraduate engagement, so those who are serious about entrepreneurship, yes, and who have developed, I'd say, the appropriate technical skills. So they are certainly not excluded from participating in I-Corps.
Thanks. Dan, you have a question? Unmute yourself.
I was just wondering, I think I've seen in the alumni magazine about the Princeton Venture Partners, something like that. There's something about an alumni driven group. I'm just wondering if there's any close ties that these efforts have to specific venture capital organizations and how that gets mixed into the equation.
Sure, I guess I can start off, and if Colleen wants to add, and she can, in a couple ways. One is through both our Office of Technology Licensing and our Princeton Entrepreneurship Council, we have some agreements with venture firms that are local, who have, one can say, early access to university IP, as well as startups that are coming out of the university. Some of these venture funds have been started by alumni, and some of them have not been started by alumni, but we do have some MOUs and some agreements, I would say now, with about a half a dozen VC firms who invest, I don't want to say exclusively, but almost exclusively in Princeton-led spinouts. Then there are other things like the Princeton Alumni Angels, which is not officially affiliated with Princeton, except through the alumni who are part of that group. And we do host joint events with the Princeton Alumni Angels through our Entrepreneurship Council. They host startup competitions, and I believe is coming up in a few weeks. I'll be making a presentation to that group as well. And then the university itself has had funds in the past. There was the Alumni Entrepreneurs Fund, the AEF fund, that was run from the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council, that invested $100,000 to early alumni startups, and they made 30 investments over the time, I believe 2015 to like 2019. And Right now, the university does not have a dedicated fund for supporting spinouts, but it is something we are having conversations about.
There must also be quite a pool of alumni who are themselves entrepreneurs who could be drawn on for advice or for talking to
Absolutely.
groups of students.
Absolutely. Tremendous amount of alumni who are working in the BC area, both undergraduates and graduates who engage quite heavily with Princeton, either through things like Graduate Futures Program or say our Keller Center, for instance, or our Alumni Entrepreneurship Council as well. And so it's great that our current students have access to this very broad network. And one program that we are in the process of developing as soon as we get further enough on the other side of COVID where we can do things in person is one that's going to be developed in joint with PrintCo, so Princeton's investment arm, developing effectively twice a semester dinner that allows Princeton students to sit down, or Princeton faculty as well, to sit down and have informal discussions with members of the BC community before they actually need to go out and seek funding.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any more questions for either Dean Priestley or Colleen? Seeing none, I will thank you very much for attending and participating in tonight's STEM programming. And as I said, you're welcome to stay and we will not be upset if you leave. So thank you very much. And we'll move on to the classmate portion of tonight's programming. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. It's a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks. Okay. Now that it's just us now, what we're going to do now is we have 4 very distinguished classmates who will be talking. For lack of another organizing principle, we're going to do it alphabetically by last name, even though Dan Hammer would prefer not to go first, he said. But what I'd ask each of the classmates to do is to identify themselves by just explain what your position is. And then basically the format for tonight is they get to talk about their work, their career paths, whatever they really want to talk about. And then we'll have all 4 of them talk. We may have a little bit of panel discussion, cross-panel discussion, and then we'll open it up to you guys for questions. And then as always, we will go until everybody tells me to turn it off. And because that's sort of the way we've been rolling. So Dan, you're up. You're muted.
How many times will that happen in my lifetime?
Yeah.
So as I said in the email thread before this meeting, I really do think if it's okay with Susan, I think Susan should go first, because Susan, as you'll see, she has a very important job. I mean, so which is going to have major impact on the direction of science and technology in this country. So Susan, if you're ready and you're willing, would you mind going first?
Okay.
I think we'll.
I was going to be the lead off guy and then we can move on, but whatever. I don't, Susan.
I mean, I'm happy. I mean, like every academic, I'm happy to talk about myself. But I think I should talk about myself after Susan.
Okay. Susan?
Okay, well, you actually told us that we should talk a little bit about our path. So I'm actually gonna use that as a lead off rather than talk about what I'm doing right now. I think perhaps it was prophetic that I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota, which is home of both IBM and the Mayo Clinic. Growing up, I really wanted to go as far away from home as possible. So Princeton was pretty far. And I thought what I would do is major in math and science and become a physician because my dad was a cardiologist and that's what I thought I could do. But I saw my path through math and science and really making the world a better place in terms of health and disease. And so I imagined that I would be a clinician who would also engage in research, having majored in math or science. And I got to Princeton and I ended up majoring in mechanical and aerospace engineering because I was advised that the freshman advising was actually better for engineers because there were fewer engineers. So I ended up in mechanical and aerospace and always thought that the machine that was of most interest to me was going to be the human body. Every summer I did research in a different place. The first summer was back at the Mayo Clinic, but after that I did my summer experience in various places. I met Ken, my husband Ken, the freshman year in chemistry lecture. And in the end, I fell in love with engineering. And I realized that that was really going to be my vantage of how I really saw improvements in medicine and human health and disease was going to be through engineering and its approach to understanding the body as a machine and how we could understand it, improve it, and understand what happens when it's not functioning well. So with my love for research, I actually decided that it was time to not just get the bio part in my summers, but instead actually get a PhD in bioengineering. Perhaps Dean Priestley didn't know, but I came to Princeton and we did have a bioengineering program and I enrolled in it. And by the end of my freshman year, which had zero engineering in it at all, they had canceled the bioengineering program. And so all along, I thought that was really going to be what I wanted. It was going to be a combination of engineering and science and biomedical sciences to really understand how one looks at the body differently when you're using all of those disciplines together in a convergent approach. So in graduate school, that was really where it all came together to me. And I fell in love with the idea of a pathway. I never actually considered going to industry, but to me, it was about being able to follow difficult problems and understanding how the body works in health and disease and how we can intervene. So my dissertation research was in traumatic brain injury and understanding how rapid head motion can cause really severe traumatic brain injuries with or without impact. Our next step, Ken did medical school in Philadelphia. I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and our next step was Ken's to pick, and we went back to the Mayo Clinic where Ken trained. They did zero head injury research there, so I thought of myself as an engineer who could study lots of different things, and I turned to the lungs. And at that point, I spent 7 years, Ken promised us 3, and it turned into 7 years studying the lung, and ended up studying the lung as another soft tissue that gets deformed again and again, this time in both health and disease, and understanding ventilator-associated lung injuries. And then our next move was back to Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, I joined the bioengineering department where I had trained as a graduate student, joined as the first female faculty member and the only female faculty member for the first 11 years that I was on the faculty there. And that's where the two parts came together. I really wanted to continue studying the brain, but now study it in children, from infants who can experience falls as well as abusive head trauma, through young adults where the injuries are primarily repeated and of a milder nature, and really understand how some tissue deformations can result in long-term devastating brain injuries while others might not. And what is how can we detect them? How can we intervene? And how could we understand their time course? And in addition, I studied ventilator-associated lung injuries, and those primarily in adults, but in some in children as well. And I just studied both of those pathways. So I think I've always enjoyed bringing cultures together. And when I was in my 24th year as a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania, I was invited to interview for a position to chair the biomedical engineering department that is simultaneously in the College of Engineering at Georgia Tech and in the School of Medicine at Emory University. So I was fascinated by the idea of one department across 2 institutions, one public, one private, such different cultures, such an opportunity. The Department of Biomedical Engineering is the largest department in the nation. It's currently ranked 2nd and 3rd in the nation for undergraduate and graduate education. Imagine going from being a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania to being in 2 very different cultures with 1,100 undergraduates in our department alone and over 300 graduate students and a community of 70 faculty. So it's like a small deanship, actually. And it was a real experience for me to really identify how with 2 very different cultures to find so many commonalities and to create family at the students, faculty, and staff levels, and to really pull in the same direction in understanding human health and disease and identifying pathways for a better future. In the end of my 4th year as a chair, I learned, and by the way, at Georgia Tech and Emory, the emphasis was really not only on undergraduate and graduate research, but education and innovation in engineering education, and really understanding how we can change how education is. And we won a National Academy of Engineering Award for innovative engineering education in 2019 for problem-driven learning, really thinking about problems first. So many times as a faculty member, students would say, why do we need to know that? Well, when you begin with the problems first, then the knowledge comes really eagerly, because you really have a drive to understand why and how, and so it's really effective. Now the department has really moved on to a new, which is story-driven learning, telling our stories, which is what we're doing tonight. We're telling our stories, but when we also allow students to tell our stories, you start becoming who you are well before you walk across that stage at graduation, when you're an architect, you're an engineer, you're a scientist. And it's really empowering to watch students put together their lives that they bring to campus and the lives they have off campus, even while undergraduates, along with their experience on campus as a student and as an activist in various organizations on campus. So it's really exciting to see story-driven learning take shape, and for the faculty to learn about telling their own stories, both in the classroom, but also we do that all the time on research grants. We're telling the story of who we are and of our science. And so it's really exciting to see that formalized and to do a good job, because as we were talking about informally, STEM faculty are not always the most scintillating storytellers, and we should be, because I think we have really exciting stories to tell that really impact our society. So at the end of my fourth year, I got a call I really couldn't say no to. And the call was from the director of the National Science Foundation, which is an agency just like NASA and is second to NASA in terms of its size and budget. It's currently at $8.5 billion, and nearly $1 billion of that is in the engineering directorate. And I was asked to lead the engineering directorate and to be on loan from Emory and Georgia Tech for 4 years. And I just, frankly, never in my life have I been called to serve and just in that moment say, I have to do this. This is such a moment in our nation for science and for engineering to impact our economy, to impact our individuals in all parts of the country, and to really connect us and to bring us optimism for our future ahead in so many different ways. And so I'm the first biomedical engineer to serve to head the engineering directorate, which is just celebrating its 40th year. And it's an awesome time to start learning about engineering and the impact of engineering education and research across our entire nation. So I'm learning about interagency collaborations and cooperation. I'm learning about contingency planning for budgets that the Congress is talking about. It's a wonderful time. I've been here now on the job for 3 months. I live now in Alexandria. Ken still lives in Philadelphia. And we just had our first grandchild who will be moving back to the DC area from Tokyo next summer. And I couldn't be more happy to live in the same town with our daughter, son-in-law, and our grandson. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks,
I
Susan.
can't believe that Dan chose to follow Susan.
You know, when we did the music session, when we did our first music concert, for various reasons, Stanley Jordan was supposed to appear sort of midway through the programming, and nobody would be willing to come on after him. And so he agreed to go last. And I fear we may have hopefully we won't have a Stanley Jordan situation here. But Dan, you're up.
No. This is the thing is, I'm smarter than I look. You don't want to hear from me now. I did this all strategic. It worked perfectly. Actually, I wanted to, the issue that I wanted to discuss today. I know we have to leave time for everyone to tell their story, but I have to say the last 2 years has been really eye-opening as far as the way society understands science, and we've had a real struggle. And I would say for myself as a scientist, things that I take as a given. I'm a relatively well-trained scientist, so I know what messenger RNA is, for example. But the vast majority of people don't know what these things are. And And, you know, the rollout of the vaccines and the resistance to it and the whole idea of understanding what herd immunity is and how can we stop an infection from spreading. It's just been eye-opening to see how the society in general understands science, accepts science, is counter to science. And I wanted to ask Susan, because she's at the NSF, what can we do? I know that, you know, the NSF as a standard practice always has lots and lots of outreach as part of all of its research portfolio. We talk to kids in elementary school, we talk to them in middle school, we talk to them in high school, we have high school students in our lab. What more can we do to spread our knowledge of science to society to help us to get through problems like this? Because we obviously had a major problem in the last 2 years.
So, you know, all the times I've had an opportunity to write my Congress representative, I never have, I admit it, okay, maybe once or twice. But you know, as a scientist and engineer, you have an opportunity to inform, to be an informed person and inform the people who represent you. And they listen and respond to every single one of those. I've now been in a number of briefings by Congress where they want to ask the engineering directorate about plastics, about windstorms, about several different of these, and they really care to learn. They're eager students to understand the aspects that are important. So that's probably one kind of outreach that none of you had really been thinking about, and I want to encourage you. And Laura was talking about volunteering. I think that that's another way to have outreach, to actually not just have a one-time event, but sequential types of engagements where your story and your engagement can really inspire someone to take a path where they don't know people who do what you do. And that's an important motivating thing. And I've learned also that the engagement should not just be with students who you would love to open up their eyes to career paths like yours or ours, or to pursue a career in science that takes them into industry, but also the parents, because students have a lot of pressure from their parents. What are you going to do with that? If you get a degree in that, then what? And so it is a family, it is embracing the family aspect of a student's education. And when we were students, not as much of the family engagement in really guiding us towards the pathways we should be taking. And that's on both parts. That's the students really have that parent engagement and welcome it, and the parents are far more involved. So families and politics, how about that?
Thanks, Susan. Dan, since you broke format, and I'm gonna maybe break format a little bit too. I see Dan Arovis has his hand up. Is your question, Dan, does your question relate to that, or is it something unrelated?
No, it's a question for Susan.
Go ahead. Let's do it.
Yeah, well, you know, congratulations. I mean, a great story, Susan, and you know, it's wonderful to see someone like you at the helm there. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you see changes shaping up for NSF in view of the Endless Frontier Act and the creation of this new directorate in technology and innovation. There's a huge bolus of cash headed, you know, that direction, and you know, a lot of us in science are concerned about the tail wagging the dog in that case. And I'm wondering if you can tell us some of the inside baseball there.
Tell me a little bit about your concerns.
Well, you know, with you know, on the order of $100 billion, you know, going there, you know, it seems largely. You know, the presumption is that this new directorate would be getting a large amount of money, and that there could be changes in the way proposals are reviewed, and there could be changes in objectives for some of the other directorates. If you know, obviously the country is very concerned about you know, about you know, technology and competition with globally, particularly with China. And, there are various side issues there as well regarding scientific collaboration, but just on the at the level of science itself, I think many people are concerned that that, as I was saying, we could have the tail wagging the dog here in a new structure for the NSF. In fact, will the name NSF change? Will it become NSFT?
No, I don't think the name will change, but I've been enjoying in my role reading history. And I have a book on my shelf, which is about the history of engineering in the National Science Foundation. And the National Science Foundation, when it was established, it was Vannevar Bush was an engineer, and he established it. And there was a debate at the very beginning about whether it should be the National Science and Engineering Foundation. And it was determined to be the National Science Foundation. And the story of engineering is one of a tough struggle through the years, where applied research was kind of a dirty word, and pure research was really what was celebrated in the early years at NSF. The discovery engine of the National Science Foundation, where great ideas and innovations begin with high-risk research, where you don't know if it'll be high reward, is the story of NSF that will not ever change. And that is highly valued and highly prized. We have a grant to the Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Engineering, from the Engineering Directorate to identify stories of engineering impact. These are investments that NSF made early on that have transformed society, that has transformed disciplines, that has transformed individuals. Because NSF, it's so important to be able to talk about the impact that we've had, as we really every year have to write about the impact that we've had for our budget and from Congress. And so the 21 budget from the president includes the idea of a new directorate that's focused on the translation. It's a technology and innovation and partnership directorate. And as described in the 21 budget, it would be something that would lift all directorates, all of the traditional directorates, to really enhance the impact of the basic research and discovery engine of NSF. So I hear your concern, but the goal would be, as described in the budget, as one that would actually enhance the impact and our workforce in terms of the training, so that that discovery that happens in the lab can actually have an impact on society. And the more I learn about mission-specific agencies, like DOE is very focused about particular narrow areas, I think there'll be wonderful partnerships that will come from the great work funded by NSF with partnerships and translation to other agencies. So I think my work between Emory and Georgia Tech, two very different institutions in the same city, could just be a precursor to the way that NSF interacts with other agencies to really help propel research that starts at NSF and technologies that spin out from that. So not unlike what we just heard from Princeton, that they're looking at how to really have more impact outside the campus.
This $100 billion, I mean, what fraction of it is going to the new directorate?
Oh, that yet to be determined. It's all in the public. We're watching it. We got a House markup and we're waiting for the Senate. So.
Thanks, Dan Rovis. And let's go back to Dan Hammer, if we could, for the rest of your discussion.
Okay, so I am, as we were discussing before, I'm from New York City. I went to Stuyvesant High School. I grew up in Staten Island. I don't know Pete Davidson. I'm a first generation student. I'm the only person in my family to go to college. And so I was fortunate to go to Princeton. I'm fortunate to go to Stuyvesant, fortunate to go to Princeton. After Princeton, like Susan, I went to the University of Pennsylvania, but I was in a different department. I was in chemical engineering, and I worked for a visionary fellow named Doug Laufenberger, who's now in the faculty at MIT. And he was one of the people who led the development of cellular engineering. And so I'm in that area, general area. After after Penn, I did a short postdoc, and then I went to Cornell in Ithaca, and I spent 8 years there. And I got tenure there, but I ended up leaving. Ithaca is a very tough place for two-career families because there's very often nothing for the spouse to do. And also, Cornell Medical Center is in New York City. It's very far away from the Ithaca campus. And because I did health-related work, it was better for me to be in a place that had a medical center. So coming back to Philadelphia was very good for my career because I had lots of collaborations with the University of Pennsylvania Medical Center. And I've been at Penn for 25 years. For 7 of those years, I was chairman of the bioengineering department. But now I'm just a regular old faculty member. I split my time between bioengineering and chemical engineering. And actually, I don't know how many of the other speakers have slides, but I have slides. Can I show? Every academic has to show some slides. So I hope I'm not the only person showing slides, but if you'll indulge me, I'm going to show.
I got slides.
Oh, good.
You're safe.
Okay, good. I figured someone was going to have slides. So, all right. So but I only have 3 slides. So it won't take that long to do. So
I've got about 25. Is that okay?
You've got about 25. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so our lab, we've had 56 PhD students from our lab, and 10 of them are in academics. And my lab is split into 2 parts. One part works on immune cell trafficking. And so if you don't know what that is, that's how immune cells get around the body. And that's key to how all of our immunological responses work, how vaccines are tolerated and how immunological information goes from place to place. When in the immune system, the way information is transferred is by molecules, by hand. So a cell has to go to another cell and touch it in order to transfer that information. And I study how cells do that. So for instance, we study how cells that are in your skin called dendritic cells, they're crawling under your skin right now, and they look like this. We study how they crawl from place to place. So these are the dendritic cell that's crawling toward a target in your body. We also study how macrophages crawl around and look for foreign bodies. So this is macrophages crawling around on the surface. And we've been studying how T lymphocytes, which are key to the immune response, how they crawl against the direction of flow in the circulation. And they, in this little video, the flow is from left to right, and the cells are crawling upstream like salmon. And this is a fundamental behavior that T cells display that other cells do not display. And we're trying to figure out what in the world is going on inside of a T cell that makes them do this. Now, the other side of our lab, we're interested in what we call synthetic cells. We call them protocells. And the idea behind protocells is to make structures that are reminiscent of real biological cells, but have components that are designer components that expand their functionality greatly. So they might be able to sense things that a real cell can't do, or they might be able to do something a cell can't do. And for instance, we've been able to build protocells that are synthetic motile machines. So this little video that I'm going to show you on the right are synthetic cells. There's no living component to them at all. But we've been able to engineer them to crawl around on surfaces powered by enzymatic motors. So this is autonomous synthetic protocell motility driven by enzymatic machines. Now, inside of real cells, there are little compartments, and they're called organelles. And the organelles are little hubs of activity inside the cell. For example, there's a well-known organelle is the mitochondria. That's where all the energy is made inside of a protocell. And we've been working on ways of making synthetic organelles inside of these machines. And just as one example of this, we've been able to make light-emitting organelles inside of cells using an enzyme called luciferase, which is the same molecule that you find in the tail of a lightning bug. But we can actually engineer this using molecular biology tools and make little organelles that light up in response to stimulus. So the idea is using an enzyme that's called nanoluciferase. It's a very bright version of luciferase, and we can flank it by molecules that allow it to be sequestered into liquid droplets. And by doing that, we can make little light emitting organelles inside of these protocells. So these could be used as sensors, so a protocell that senses some molecule outside, and then this enzymatic cascade lights up, and then the protocell starts blinking, and something interesting is going on. So those are the only 3 slides I have. So that's it. That's the whirlwind tour of the Hammer Lab. But that gives you a snapshot of what we're working on at the moment.
I have to remember to unmute. Thanks, Dan. Anything else, or should we move on to our next Dan?
I have a quick question for
Yeah.
my esteemed Dan colleague. So are you guys involved in commercializing any of this? Getting back to this entrepreneurship issue, how do you tie what you're doing, which obviously has lots of applications to making it actually happen out in the real world?
We have filed disclosures and patents for some of the unique molecules that we can use to make membranes. So one of the things I glossed over in the protocell work is that you don't have to make a membrane out of a phospholipid. You can make them out of other components. And we have recombinant proteins that we can design that make membranes. And we have a patent portfolio on those. And it turns out that the protein that we'd be using is derived from plants. And we've used it recently to make little nanoparticles that can block the entry of SARS-CoV-2 into cells. We call them SARS inactosomes. So they could be functionalized with recombinant peptides at the end from the ACE2 receptor. And we have patent protection on those. So we do look to commercialize from time to time. I have to say, it's interesting. I have not, we've had a lot of commercial successes out of the University of Pennsylvania, as Ken and Susan know. I mean, enormously successful technology transfer in CAR T therapy and in mRNA vaccine technology. I have not hit on a major home run for my lab, but we continue to patent and protect things that we think could one day be commercially viable.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Let's turn it over to Dan Rokhsar.
Okay, well, I also have slides. So that's visible to everybody. And I thought I would tell you a little bit about my scientific transformation. I started off life at Princeton as a physicist, and I ended up as an evolutionary biologist. And I thought that might be interesting for people to sort of hear how that happened briefly. Okay, so I think when people talk about their careers, especially after such a long time as we've all had since our graduation from college, it often kind of glosses over the fact that there's a lot of randomness. And we start here on this orange dot. And then where do we go, right? And there's lots of different ways in which and places we could go. And sometimes after a long period of time, you say, well, here's how I got from A to B, and here are the hurdles that I surmounted. And I think that, at least for me, that kind of obscures some of the randomness. I thought I would highlight that randomness aspect. So I was a nerd. I always liked physics and math, and at Princeton, I found sort of a home and a calling to do physics, despite my parents kind of wanting me to be a doctor. And then took a fairly sort of standard trajectory. I was an undergrad at Princeton, I went to Cornell for grad school, I did a postdoc at IBM for a couple of years, and then ended up at Berkeley, where I was sort of settling down to do different kinds of physics. And the physics that I'm involved in or was involved in is the same as related to Dan Arovis and many other of our classmates. Thinking about how when you put together lots of small pieces that may themselves be kind of unremarkable, you can get larger scale behaviors that are substantially different. So the mantra is kind of more is different, and the sort of canonical example of that is just a gas of atoms. It doesn't matter what they are. If you cool them down enough, they form a solid. And now that solid has all kinds of properties, like the desk or the chair that you're sitting on. that don't exist or can't even be talked about in terms of the elementary constituents. So that was kind of my calling. I really like to think about how simple parts combine to make a complicated whole. And then what are the different ways in which the whole can be more complicated? What kinds of orderings are possible, and how do these features emerge seemingly out of the interaction of all of these sort of uninteresting parts, or potentially uninteresting parts. So when I got to Berkeley, my senior colleague took me aside and he said, here's my advice to you. It's kind of like plastics. He said, find something that you can do really well and then become the best in the world at it. And his vision was, really burrow deeply down into one thing, so that at the end of your career, you're the only person, you're the world's leader in that one thing, and nobody can come close to you. That was his vision of success. And it kind of wasn't my mindset. I ended up working on lots of different things, all of which really only had as their unifying whole the idea that there's different kinds of ordering. And I won't take you through these pictures, but I was kind of not the best at focusing on one thing and just continuing to beat it until I retired. And everything was going smoothly. I had a lab, I had funding, I had students, I had postdocs. Some of the stuff we had done was well received. I was up for tenure. And then all of a sudden something happened that I totally didn't anticipate. This molecule that I'm drawing here is thyroxine, the human thyroid hormone, or thyroid hormone of all mammals. And it turned out over the course of the semester when I was up for tenure, my body started making an enormous amount of this. And at the end of that semester, I felt terrible. And I really couldn't keep doing what I was doing. I'd lost a lot of weight. There were a lot of various kind of symptoms. And so the semester ended, I thought, well, I'll just get some rest, eat right, and I'll be fine. And I couldn't get a hold of myself. And I went to see a doctor that had been recommended to me. And he drew me this picture of this molecule. I said, okay, well, I have a lot of this molecule. How does that translate into the way I feel? And he said, well, your cells have too many mitochondria. Dan just mentioned this. This is the power plant of the cell. And I thought, from my naive high school and truncated Princeton biology education, I should feel great, right? I should have more mitochondria means more power. More is always better. And the doctor said, no, you have a lot of them, but they're not really producing useful energy. That's why you're feeling kind of jittery and losing weight. And I said, that's cool. How does that happen? Well, how does this molecule translate into that effect on my body? And he said, and whether this is true or not is a little bit up in the air, but he said, nobody really knows. And he started talking about a paper that he had read a few months ago. And I thought, well, that's really cool, right? Nobody really knows. I think many of us who've had the opportunity to lecture for undergraduates, it's very rare that if you're teaching an undergraduate class, some student raises their hand and asks you a question that you really can't answer, because the real frontiers of a lot of science are deep at the end of these long tunnels that we've been digging for over 100 years. And you can pretty much, unless you're really at the end of the tunnel, you really can sort of talk about what's going to go on in these different directions. And the idea that a layman, could almost literally stagger in off the street and ask this question was really exciting to me. And so eventually I got cured. The treatment is actually quite simple. I had lots of questions, because not just things going on with me, but other members of my family and friends. Every time I asked a question, I got either nobody really knows, or the answer just kind of blew my mind. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do. Please don't repeat this. I haven't told anybody at Berkeley, but I did take one molecular biology class at Princeton to, quote, keep the door open to medicine. And I in my memory, I got a C. It's very possible that it was a D. So that's what I teach now, just a little bit odd. So during this period where I was recovering, all my students graduated. I hadn't taken on new students or postdocs because I wasn't really firing on all cylinders. And then at the same time, there were new discoveries in physics that I could keep working on, but they weren't sort of occupying all of my energies. And importantly, at that time, I wasn't married, I didn't have kids, and then I got tenure. And so the end result of this was that I had a lot of free time on my hands, in a sense. And I had all these questions, and I ended up spending several years taking classes, doing a lot of reading, working in labs as kind of a volunteer, and generally kind of trying to rebuild myself as a biologist while I was teaching physics and doing some physics. And that took a while. And people would say, are you still doing physics? And I thought, well, kind of, because I really want to understand how, at some basic level, how life works. And that's about how simple parts, individual molecules, combine to make, a cell that can crawl around, like the pictures that Dan just showed. And how does all that actually work at the level? I wasn't so much interested in the physics, but I thought, well, at least this is a connection to my prior life. Then I had an opportunity, Susan mentioned the Department of Energy, which is focused on new kinds of energy, but also historically is focused on nuclear physics and nuclear energy and the effects of radiation on life, because DOE has in the past created a lot of radiation through its connection to the atomic bomb project. And so as a tenuous connection to that history of radiation biology, the DOE ended up being an important player in the Human Genome Project. And around this time, when I had spent like 6 years kind of repositioning myself as a biologist, the DOE set up a genomics facility near Berkeley. And it just happened that at the time that I was poking around looking for something to do, they needed somebody to lead a team to analyze and interpret data. And so I ended up taking a leave of absence and working at the DOE Genome Center, which was kind of transformational, because now no longer was I sort of an aspiring biologist, but now I was actually, I was constantly being bombarded with real biological data all the time. And this turned out to be transformative, because I don't have time to go into what genomics is, but everybody knows about DNA, and the sequence of DNA controls all the inherited characteristics of an animal or a plant or bacteria. And so it's a general purpose tool. If I can determine the genome sequence of something, then that gives me a way of accessing some aspect of the biology. And once I'm done with looking at one organism, I can look at another and another and another. The technique is the same, but the kinds of questions you can ask can vary depending on what you're looking at. So this was my sort of either my hammer or my street lamp, depending on how you like to look at it. And so over the past 15 years or so, I've been looking at the genomes of lots of different animals. And I was kind of interested in the way all animals were related to each other. And so I've ended up sequencing, complex animals like the genomes of complex animals like the octopus, or this is a leech, this is a hagfish. There's a lot of animals out there that you would consider worms, you'd recognize as such, but they're different kinds of worms. Sea anemones, corals, sponges, not this particular sponge, but another species. And so this is just a small group of animals that we've tried to sequence and then analyze. And the key idea here, and this is almost my last slide, is that if you look at the tree of life and you ask, where are we? We're here, we're vertebrates, right? Animals with a backbone. And this is where, at least when I started all this, I thought, well, those are animals, right? Animals are birds and dogs and frogs and lizards and fish. Yeah, those are all the animals that are really interesting. But it turns out that there's lots of other animals out there. And this is sort of how they're related to each other. So it turns out that vertebrates are more closely related to sea stars, echinoderms or sea urchins, than either group is to mollusks, because you have to go back further in time to reach their common ancestor. This is a modern view of the tree of life. The timescales are vast. So the tips here are living animals, the ones whose genomes we can sequence. And then these ancient points back here, 600, 900 million years ago, an appreciable fraction of life's history, are animals that were ancestors that gave rise to, in the same way that you can think about your great-great-great-great-grandparents, except now much longer ago. These animals that were alive 600 million years ago gave rise to all of these different descendants, which are basically all the animals that are alive today. And so I spent a lot of my time thinking about how to by comparing, say, a vertebrate and a sea star, that tells me something about their common ancestor. Comparing a vertebrate to an octopus, that tells me something about this deeper common ancestor. And so that's the game that I end up playing. And it's taken me lots of different places. I ended up switching departments. So now I'm officially teaching molecular and cell biology at Berkeley. I still have what they call a 0% appointment in physics, but for the most part, I'm now a biologist. I'm still affiliated with the Energy Genomics Center, but that's a totally different discussion, thinking about bioenergy crops. So how can you grow plants to help make biofuels? And then I've also been involved in a new university in Okinawa, which is a marine biology kind of preserve in a way, and has given me access to lots of different interesting kind of animals. So in the end, I've been a physicist longer than I was a biologist, longer than I was a physicist. That's it.
Thank you, Dan. That was fascinating, and I do appreciate the Talking Heads references at the beginning. Dan Hammer, you had you have a question?
Dan, did you interact at all with the theoretical biology division at Los Alamos? Because I know that early on in the Human Genome Project, actually I think it was started, I spent a summer there, and I think it started, there was a guy named Walter Goad who was typing DNA sequences into a database the summer I was there. And was that a group that you were interacting with?
A little bit, not so much with him, but with other people. At that time, the main thing that they were contributing were the sequencing of chromosome 16. So I knew a lot of the people that were more focused on that one. I've talked a little bit with, I'm spacing on his name, but there's a theoretical immunologist there who's also, I think, affiliated with Santa Fe. So they do have a history of sort of theoretical biology. I was kind of, in this transition, I was kind of militantly thinking, I don't want to do anything that's like a physicist doing sort of fake biology. I wanted to do, I had to be a biologist. And so that, I think, made me not appreciate as much some of the stuff that people were doing in theoretical biology.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Let's turn and move to a slightly different STEM field. And we have Tara Smith.
Hi, so I don't have slides. So yeah, I was a math major at Princeton, and I may have had, I had my own sort of random path, I guess. So that seems to be a common story for many of us. I also was, I think, as was true for Susan, influenced by my dad, and he was a biochemist and worked for Big Pharma, and I was going to be a biochemist and study all these things that were going to, save the world. And when I went to Princeton, I did well in freshman chemistry, and I hated it. And so the first day of organic chemistry lab, I walked out of the lab an hour into it and went to the registrar and dropped the course. I was like, I'm not going through another year of chemistry lab, and certainly not orgo. It sounded horrible. So then I had no idea what I was going to do. And I liked the people in the stats department, but I liked my classes in the math department. And so I ended up, even though the stats department had much better food at their get-togethers, I ended up being a math major. So, I mean, the stats department had pizza and homemade brownies and cookies by the faculty members, and the math department had cheap sherry and mixed nuts. And that was like kind of the difference, but I loved my math courses. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna be a math major. And it was really hard to, call my parents and tell my dad that I was not going to follow in his footsteps and be a biochemist. I was going to be a math major, and I really had no idea what you could do with a math major. So I thought maybe I'd be an actuary, but I decided to apply to grad school anyway, because I was still having a lot of fun studying math. So I did, and I went to Berkeley after Princeton and decided I would keep studying it as long as I had support, and was having fun studying it. And then decided I would continue to follow an academic career as long as I got jobs. And So at some point along the line, I actually solved the two-body problem with my husband, and we both ended up in the same department at University of Cincinnati. He's also a mathematician. And so I was just sort of rolling along being a mathematician, and got randomly involved in a couple of other things that ended up for me being some of the most rewarding things that I did in my career. By chance, I got involved with the AP Calculus program. A co-author of mine convinced me that I should try going and doing this grading, and it was fascinating. It was like summer camp for math geeks, and I think it had a profound influence on my teaching, because high school teachers and college faculty are equals at the AP Calculus grading sessions, and you are working with some of the most talented, dedicated, and amazing high school math teachers out there. And their perspective on teaching and assessment and everything else just really kind of, I think, just changed my view on things. So that was really fascinating, and I stuck with that program involvement in it for about 20 years, ultimately actually being on the test development committee for 6 years. So the people who write those fun free response questions, which was extraordinarily fun, got me back to Princeton several times a year because we'd meet at ETS, or if the ETS conference center was full, then we would get to stay at the NASA Inn downtown, which was even more fun. And I could go for runs at the Institute Woods and along the towpath, and it was great. And then towards the end of that stint, I was asked if I wanted to be a program director at in the Division of Mathematical Sciences at NSF. And so that sounded like loads of fun, and because I always liked serving on panels. So I went and did that for 2 years. And again, that was a kind of transformative and fascinating thing, because the national perspective that you get on what's going on in research in your field is so different, and your understanding of the whole research enterprise is so different. And I got to do some cross-directorate things there with people in the Division of Undergraduate Education and Education and Human Resources Directorate, and that was really interesting. We had an attempted but failed effort to do a co-funding thing with the Department of Education. So that was also just really interesting too. And then kind of by accident, because of some things that were going on at my home institution and the fact that I was at NSF, I was drafted to go back to my home institution as an associate dean for research and graduate studies in my college. So I did that for 2.5 years. And when I saw that sort of coming to an end with a new dean coming in and a transition from sort of a horizontal mechanism of, I was research and graduate studies, there was another associate dean for undergraduate, and there was another associate dean for faculty affairs. And they were transitioning into a more vertical thing of somebody who was going to be associate dean for the sciences, somebody for social sciences, and somebody for humanities, which was going to involve restructuring quite a bit, because at the moment, 2 of the associate deans were from the math department, and that didn't work with the whole. So we basically were all transitioned out and new people transitioned in. And I, at that point, had long since finished all my active research projects, had graduated my last PhD student, had not had time to really do anything new when I was doing all this administrative stuff. And I really sort of wanted to go back to NSF, but I wanted to do something different. So I applied for and got a position as a program officer in the Division of Graduate Education. And I was there for 3 years. And then at the end of that, my husband retired when I went back to NSF for that stint. And so he was sort of, well, don't you want to retire and come join me and do fun things and travel the world? And I said, yeah, that sounds great. Let's retire together and do fun things and travel the world. And that lasted for 9 months until the world shut down. So that was, but I would say that, it was kind of chance that I ended up as a mathematician, and certainly in an academic career. It was chance that I ended up getting as involved as heavily as I did with the AP Calculus program. And it was chance that I ended up spending a total of 5 years at NSF in 2 different divisions. And each of those things was really fascinating and gave me different perspectives on things. I think in some ways the most interesting to me was AP Calculus and then Division of Graduate Education and it's just because the crossroads of people that I intersected with was so much broader than just the university math researcher environment that, that I was in my department and then in Division of Mathematical Sciences. So.
Thanks, Tara. That's great. That's, again, another interesting career path. Since it's 9:30-ish, why don't we start by throwing it open to questions? So again, if you have questions, I see people raising their hands. Bruce, you're up.
Okay, great. Yeah, I had a question for Tara, actually. Did you see recently changes in the way that people approach high school mathematics as teachers? Because, as Susan mentioned, there's this impetus to try to start with some sort of story, to start with a problem that needs to be addressed, and then to motivate students to learn the material from the story. And I'm wondering if that is penetrating into mathematics, if you've seen anything about that.
Yeah, I think there's so many competing forces right now, I think, that are affecting how people do that. So certainly we went through a period where an awful lot of the high school curriculum was actually driven in some ways by the AP curriculum and the push to get kids through calculus. And for better or for worse. Some of that I think was really, really good. I actually am a huge fan of calculus reform and thinking about problems in a deeper and more interesting way. And in terms of really understanding what it's doing and not just grinding through a bunch of calculations. I see tension between sort of integrated math that was a really interesting effort to bring some things consolidated together. And I think it's great if it's done well, but I feel like it's a real struggle it's a struggle for people to change lanes when they've been driving in the same lane for a really long time. And it's a struggle, we are a somewhat mobile society. And for a student to go from a school that's teaching integrated math to a school that's doing algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, pre-calculus, calculus, they don't mesh well. How you mesh that is a problem. I love what really skilled teachers can do with Exeter math, which is very problem-based and it's just fabulous for really, really good teachers and really motivational for the right students. Parental involvement in education is a very double-edged sword, and the resistance from parents who weren't confident in math when they were kids and now are convinced that their kids aren't learning anything. A lot of the math reform efforts are, I think, sabotaged in part by parents being very uncomfortable with it, and also with some things where when you're really trying to build really good numerical and mathematical understanding and foundational bases, you may, for a while, sacrifice some computational speed and facility, and that will bring test scores down. And then everybody panics, and without, and they throw out the new system in 2 years' time. I see an awful lot of elementary school teachers became elementary school teachers because they love it when kids unlock the secrets of reading, and they are themselves uncomfortable often with mathematics, and the effect of that, and with a lot more teaching to the test, which I've really seen in my local school district too, because that's how the teachers are being assessed. So that's what's going to get rewarded. And that has led to a lot of scripted mathematics instruction, which to me is death. So there's just so many competing forces here that I don't feel like we've had a coherent response And I see efforts being made there, but I think that we're still in the early stages of it. I think that the whole idea of mathematical knowledge for teaching is really critical and really important, but actually getting that down into the trenches is a big lift.
Yeah. The success that I've seen so far is that people who are moving to online teaching can carry their integrated curriculum with them much more easily because they're not tied to a particular school or a particular curriculum. They can follow it.
Yeah, I mean, you see this at the college level too. Harvey Mudd's doing some really interesting things with a truly integrated linear algebra, multivariable calculus, and differential equations sequence, which is, you know, you need it because little pieces of that build on each thing, and they're to get the whole structure up. You can't do one and then the next one and then the next one because you never really see the full thing of everything. But then what that means is, like, you can't take a course at another school and transfer it in there because no other school does it that way. They all do a semester of linear algebra and a semester of DE and a semester of multivariable in random orders. They're not, no school's consistent, so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Jay, you're up. Unmute.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm curious about one thing about what it's like to teach today's undergraduates 40 years after we were in school. And the reason I ask is I worked 30 years in product development and engineering after I got out of Princeton. And shout out to Susan, I was in mechanical engineering, if you can remember that far back. And I went to Stuyvesant like Danny Hammer. But I worked 30 years and then I did the unthinkable. I became a college engineering professor where I teach today at SUNY Stony Brook. And after being away from the world of the graduates for 35 years, I was like a fish out of water. I mean, my first year I had culture shock. So I just didn't know who I was talking to. so I'm just curious what are other people who have taught undergraduates lately? Do you see yourself from 40 years back, or is this a different generation, a different world?
Well, for me, I teach at such a different institution. And so it's really hard to compare. And I'd be interested to hear what Susan has to say about the different institutions you've been at. And particularly, I'm fascinated by the idea of a department that crosses two different, you know, public and private institutions. It's like, wow. But my university has a lot of first generation kids and a lot of kids who are working 20 hours a week in addition to trying to hold on to an 18 to 20 credit hour class schedule so that they don't rack up too much debt and they can get done quickly. And that is not a recipe for success. You know, remember the reading room open till 2 in the morning? I mean, our libraries are empty after hours because the students commute to their apartment and they go to their jobs, and you know, they can do work in class, and none of this like 3 hours outside of class for every hour in. And I'm not sure that it's a difference in 30 years as much as it is a difference in the extreme privilege of being able to go to a residential school like Princeton and do nothing but focus on undergraduate.
And to have work study positions that are in laboratories and not necessarily in the gym or in the cafeteria.
Yeah, and not worrying about loans is, you know, which at Princeton today, pretty much you don't have to.
Either of the Dans, or frankly, any of the Dans, want to weigh in on this one?
I mean, at Berkeley, we also have a lot of first generation students, and that's, I think they're some of the most interesting and exciting kids to teach. I would say one thing that especially now in the pandemic era, but I think it was happening before then, you know, I might be teaching a class of 70 or 80 molecular biology majors, right? So they've decided this is what they're going to do, and this is a required class for their graduation. And they're the top ones, they'll stay after class, they'll seek me out. They have interesting questions they really want to understand. And I am always surprised by the relatively large number of students that are making all kinds of decisions behind the scenes. Like, I'm not going to do the reading because you haven't actually assigned me a problem that's going to require me to do the reading now. So I'm going to choose to do whatever else they're doing because I know that I can read that during the study period at the end. They're always there's a group of students, a class of students that are always kind of gaming the system. And it's unclear to me why they're even in college. And I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten more kind of grumpier and less tolerant of that because as I get farther and farther from that mindset, maybe now that my kids are in college, I'll have a little more patience for it.
Okay, then next up is Dana Rovis.
Yeah, well, two things. One, just a comment on this last issue, and then I had a question for Tara. So the comment is, so yeah, I teach at UC San Diego, at the sister campus to Berkeley, and we're also very STEM focused, and I'm in the physics department. And mostly over the past 20 years, I've been teaching graduate students, but every once in a while I teach upper division undergraduates. And I found, my experience at Princeton and also when I was a grad student at UC Santa Barbara is that I really learned a lot more from my fellow students than I did from professors. I mean, obviously my, PhD thesis advisor was a big influence, but in terms of the classes, I mean, we've all had great classes, but really sitting down, talking with your fellow students who sort of are at the same level of confusion as you are. I mean, there's just nothing like working through that confusion with your colleagues and your peers. And so, one thing that I tried to do in teaching undergraduates is to promote that sort of experience when you're organizing problem sessions where students will self-organize into groups and collaborate to work on homework problems together at the blackboard, and then somebody will present the work of their group so they can sort of have some sort of role of expert once in a while. And I found that the students really like that, and that the stronger students really enjoy being able to help the weaker ones, and they take it very seriously. And so to the extent that you have students that might not live on the same campus, or of course COVID has messed everything else up, but I think sort of encouraging students to interact is still useful after all these years. My question for Tara was that I mean, so much of what's taken to be math literacy, I mean, requirements for mathematics, if you're in a STEM field and you're a major at some university, it's overwhelmingly calculus. You have to take 1 semester, 2 semesters calculus. And I was wondering, you had mentioned in some cases now it's more integrated with other areas, linear algebra, differential equations, whatnot. But it many people have pointed out that other areas of math, combinatorics, discrete math, it's particularly useful in many fields. I mean, computer science has gotten so big. It's on many campuses, it's the largest department. So there, I don't know, maybe calculus isn't as useful. Are people rethinking what math literacy means in that context? I mean, if you maybe we don't need to force people everyone through this calculus hoop.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much inertia And it's really hard. We went through this in my department, trying to convince faculty members to rethink what they would really require of students and what would be okay and what would be reasonable pathways to the degree is very, very hard. And I really do feel that we could get a lot more students getting a lot further in math with a lot more math literacy if we rethought what an entry-level course looked like and didn't have to have so many of them require calculus. There is frankly no reason that you cannot do a first linear algebra course before calculus or concurrently with calculus. I think I would like to see more accessible differential equations courses because I think it's phenomenal for modeling. And I say this as somebody who never took differential equations and never taught it. Now, Princeton didn't require it of math majors. So yeah, wow. And you know, I regret that. I think that statistics is phenomenally important for literacy, for quantitative literacy. You know, the number of people who can't understand 1 in 500 people dying from COVID as somehow being a greater risk than 1 in 10,000 people having a reaction to a shot. Politics in there, but you know, it's like, you know, I look at these numbers and I go, wow, 1 in 500 people died.
Literacy and statistics.
And that's not 1 in
definitely
500 people who contracted the disease. That's 1 in 500 of the population as a whole. Wow. And you know, the number of people in our country that can't do that and that can't look at a graph in a newspaper and understand what it's telling them. So there's just so many more. Discrete math, linear algebra, elementary statistics, and calculus could all be taught at the entry level. And you might actually get more people excited by them entering one of those other routes instead of funneling them in through calculus. So I'd love to see it. I have not figured out how to achieve it.
don't need so many delta epsilon proofs, you know.
No. Speaking of, you know, to somebody who never did like analysis.
So Kathy, did you have another question or were you having a comment about this one?
I'm sorry.
Kathy, you're muted.
Kathy, you're up. You're muted.
Because I had a follow on to this question.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna, well,
Oh.
I mean,
I actually,
Susan, why don't you go ahead first?
I want to give a shout out for our professors. Our professors who were incredibly famous, well-renowned researchers themselves who value teaching undergraduates. And that is an extremely special thing and is not replicated at all institutions. And whereas every faculty member uniformly great in my experience at Princeton, no. But was the vast majority? Yes. And so that is really, really special. And I just want to give a shout out because it's not about the students we should be talking about. We should be talking about the faculty.
Well, that kind of ties in with a question. I actually was very inspired by your presentation, Susan, and then it was only further reinforced by everybody else's. But it's about what you talked about, the storytelling piece. Because, you know, I'm an art historian, and in my new position, I actually have a staff person who's called the chief storyteller. And, you know, I mean, but even that, it's interesting because it's not something that maybe board members or other people really look at as a viable position, but it's so important to everything that we do, or we all do collectively, whether you're in humanities or in sciences, because you have to understand the arc, right? You have to understand that narrative arc, whether you're writing for a grant or you're trying to, as Tara talks about, connecting with this broader, broader community of people, or understanding the literacy of the of statistics for, you know, everyday life at this point. But I guess the point of my question really was, you know, was it studying science because I have daughters that are in the sciences. And I was also a kid and I love math, but I was told in 10th, 11th, 12th grade, girls don't study math. I was literally shut down in high school to pursuing, sciences. But I am in a household of science focused females, which I think is great. But the question was really, do you think studying sciences as because it wasn't STEM when we were in school, at a liberal arts college allowed for an understanding of a broader narrative and a storytelling, and maybe also because of the professors? Does that Princeton experience set us apart, set you all apart differently than maybe if you had been at Caltech or at MIT or some other place? Because I remember even a number of years, maybe it was 10, maybe even 20 years ago now, there was a big push on helping scientists be able to have a narrative, be able to talk, to be able to speak, to be able to write about what they're doing in a way that communicated with the public. So I guess that was what kind of inspired, my question.
Can I jump in on that one?
Sure,
So,
please. Yeah.
first of all, I'm the chief storyteller in my lab. I actually, at the beginning of every group meeting, I tell a story, and I always say this is a stupid story, but it's really not a stupid story. So I'm trying to tell the students about something that's going on that tells them how the world is working. I took a course at Princeton on the Weimar Republic. And that's why I've been freaking out for the last 2 years, is because I'm watching the Weimar Republic in slow motion in the United States. And that was because of Princeton education, you had to take lots of liberal arts classes. And the classes I remember the most were the ones not necessarily in science and engineering, the liberal arts classes. I took this great course on the history and philosophy of science, and I'm always referring to that. And, Descartes and how he was the great philosopher who helped kings and queens understand their societies. And I think it had a major positive impact on how I perceive science and how I teach science to students. And I'll tell stories in class that have nothing to do with science. And I think that comes from the Princeton education.
I'm sure ethics and things like that come into play too. I mean, it's like a larger part of that discourse.
Well, we require ethics now. We didn't require it when we were undergraduates, but in bioengineering, of course, ethics is very important. I do want to say something else that is related to what you mentioned, and this touches upon what Dan Rokhsar talked about. The demographics of the student body in engineering and science is completely different now than it used to be. And one change for the better is the percentage of women that we have in our engineering classes. I mean, at Princeton, I think we had 32 graduates. We had 2 women out of 32 students. And at Penn, and I think it's very typical of lots of engineering schools, 50% women in my undergraduate classes, which is a change for the better for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, thanks. Anybody else have any questions, comments, complaints? No? Bruce, you got something?
Yeah, I just wanted to pile on as far as the quality of the Princeton faculty was concerned. I found that so I wasn't one of those people who write down things and work from the book. I was somebody who had to work by hearing and speaking and by interacting with others. And the Princeton math professors were able to take mathematics and make it into something that you just talk about. And, you can't do just that with mathematics, but it really helped a lot. I ended up in my career following the trajectory of information. What is the information and how do we talk about it and how does it help? And how do we apply it to the problem we have at hand? And that mode of thinking, I think, was very well supported at Princeton and then served me well later.
Thanks, Bruce. Dan, you got another question?
Yeah, I was just throw a question out there for everybody. Now that most of us have kids who are actually college or college age or beyond that. One thing I've noticed I thought was sort of weird with my own kids in their classes is the extent to which they're not if they have a question about something and they talk to me about their classes, sometimes I'll ask, well, have you looked in the textbook? And the answer is like invariably no. I mean, they know and I've talked to colleagues about this who've had the same experience that students are, my impression is they're much more passive now than they were in our day. They're sort of expecting to attend class, have the knowledge poured into their brain, and then be able to produce whatever they're asked to produce. And rather than going to the library till 2 in the morning or reading the textbook, as the case may be. Is this sounding, I hope this is sounding weird to the rest of you, but as I say, with many of my colleagues, they've had similar experiences with their own kids.
I mean, to me, I'm still buying physics textbooks just to read them.
Me too. Yeah, I know you are.
I can't help it, but it is striking how I think maybe with so much information and the ability to just Google something, that I was reading somewhere that kids today have this idea that they don't need to learn specific things because they know they can always access it. It's as if the web is an extension of their own minds. And I think, obviously that relieves them of the responsibility of having to absorb and integrate things so that they can, act on it in real time versus just saying, oh, I know that I can always look up this.
It's like the mathematician joke, a solution exists,
That's right. So we'll see where that takes us as a society.
I worry about that because my doctoral advisor, one of the most astonishing things to me was the connections he was able to draw across different things because he was familiar with so much and he had integrated so much in his mind that he saw that this problem in some advanced algebraic thing was actually related to this fact that he learned about in his geometry class in high school in Hong Kong. And boy, his geometry class was so much richer than mine. It's like knowing, and I was much more of I know that theorem exists in a book. I don't really have to memorize it because I know where to go look it up. And it's even more profound, I think, for students nowadays. It's this attitude of, I know I can go look it up. And your brain just doesn't build those, weird flash of insight things.
I mean, hopefully their brains are building other connections
when you
relating to
haven't done that.
gaming and things like that.
It wouldn't be bad if they said if they realized they could look it up and they actually looked it up.
Hi, this is Jay. I can definitely second the motion that students don't read the book, but to answer your question, Daniel, is this common? I can tell you it is, because one of the side jobs I do in my semi-retirement is I work as a consultant to the McGraw-Hill Book Company. And I teach faculty around the United States, about 100 people a year, how to do online education. And the number one selling software product McGraw-Hill has is a product called Learn Smart, which is reading comprehension, required assignments that force the students to actually read the textbook. And that's a truism, cuts across engineering, management, biology, chemistry, health sciences, doesn't matter. Every professor I talk to, I'm up to about 250 people, says the same thing. They don't read the book. So it is a huge problem. And I do agree with you though, that people think they can Google anything, that no need to have a coherent step A, B, C, D, E kind of structured education that we had as kids. It's more the, if I need it, I Google it, there's my formula, let's go. Other than that, this book's a waste of my time. That's just the prevailing mentality. It really is.
I mean, it's really a different approach to knowledge, you know.
Yeah.
It is.
I will,
No, I agree.
I will say that I think one of the things that made me become a math major was that I had always been able to not read the math book when I was in high school. I prided myself in my pre-calculus course of never taking the math book home from school the entire school year. And my wonderful math 205 professor at Princeton my first year, who was probably a wonderful person, but I couldn't understand almost anything he said, and he tended to speak into his collar facing the blackboard. So I had to learn how to read Hoffman and Kunze. I had to take that stupid book and sit down and read it. And I said, the thing that was probably most significant in my deciding to become a math major was that my freshman fall, I had to learn how to read a freaking math book.
Who was your professor?
JJ Cohn.
Oh, it was okay.
Yeah, I spoke to him just recently.
Yeah.
I had Goss, I think, for Hoffman and Kunze.
He said he was surprised that people didn't just intuitively understand adjoints and things that made sense to him.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I learned how to read. I had to sit and struggle through that book, and it was absolutely the best thing that could have happened to me freshman fall.
Nancy, you're up. You have a question? You're muted.
There you go. Well, I'm impressed that you were able to read the textbook, because that's linear. Is that the linear algebra class you're talking about? Oh, I still remember how miserable it was, and
Okay,
barely-
so I wasn't going to be a math major. I was going to be a biochem major, so I switched it to pass fail.
Mhm. Okay, good for you. But I think of that was sort of anyway, I was an engineer. I've been an environmental consultant. I studied geological engineering. But really my question was, one of you've mentioned that 50% of the students are women. And what I feel like I'm observing is that there's a great attrition, of women once they're in the field. And it makes me sad, because I like that I've worked my whole life. So I'm wondering if you guys are seeing that, and, any thoughts on how to encourage people to get through the craziness of working and families and everything. That's my question.
I think you're right. I certainly noticed in the progression of reunions for our class, the number of women who at our 5th reunion were all working. At our 10th reunion, many were working. And by the time child number 2 came, whenever they came, and child number 3, then if you were still working in our class, that was unusual. But then I have to tell you, I was really energized at our 30th when women started re-entering the workforce in other career paths, and men started looking tired and thinking about early retirement. So I have to tell you, using our class and reunions as sort of a bubble that I follow, I find that very interesting. But I think we haven't solved it, and this pandemic has demonstrated that women have made progress, but it's been metastable and very, very fragile. And there's a lot that we're going to have to do to ensure that our workforce is diverse and in academia.
The last I checked in physics, we have about, I think, 20% on BA degrees. Your bachelor's degrees are with women, about 20% PhDs, and about 20% assistant professors. So that seems to suggest that, there's that much of the problem lies upstream from the universities. And, I don't know what could be done to, I'd like to see some good longitudinal studies, following women and other underrepresented groups in my field, but in STEM in general. The ones that are really good in math and science in high school, do they, get off the train at some point, and why? And Susan, do you know, has there been any useful work done there? I think you're muted.
There we go. I think what is emerging in the research is the importance of community and finding those communities and finding others who can connect with you and with where you are and provide that really antidote for the isolation that people feel. And it's in some professions, isolation is rampant. And I would say in academia, that's one of them, where we really are on our own. We're small business people, where our lab is our business and we need to raise funds for it. And if we don't, we have to fire people, and it's very stressful. And to find others who have lives like ours, I think is important. And so for some, that's national meetings. And for others, it's many different ways to connect. And the pandemic has been tough for a lot of people who depend on those communities as the fabric for their life to really feel empowered in a way that is sort of integrates all of work life into having meaning. And we all know people who their real meaning is outside of the workplace, and for others, the real meaning is inside the workplace. And I think the perhaps the best answer is when it's both. And I think that we have work to do there.
Unfortunately, I spend too much time on Twitter. And one of the big subjects on science Twitter is about the effect of the pandemic, particularly on women who are running labs and have small children or school-age children. And I wonder if there is going to be a very significant negative impact on women who have gone through the pandemic, tried to run their lab or try to keep their lab going. Because as you know, if you have one year where you're having difficulty writing proposals, that can really mess you up. And the effect can be much longer than a year. So I think this should be studied, but I anticipate there's going to be a big effect.
All right, well, it's a little after 10. We can keep going, but it seems like maybe this is a good place to stop. I see Dan Goodman is shaking his head, and that makes sense. I did want to thank, for the record, Dean Priestley and Colleen Burrus. I wanted to thank all of the panelists who not only put on a great show tonight, but helped me put this thing together. I also wanted to thank Burton Keith, who I think was on before but isn't here anymore, for helping me organize this, as well as Chris Chambers, and the support from our class officers. If you guys have any ideas for other STEM related programs, please email me, tiger82secretary@gmail.com. I'm happy to provide or help provide this platform for classmates to pretty much talk about pretty much anything. And the more you guys do, the less I have to, which is even better. So on that note, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and stay tuned for the announcement of what our December program is, because I'm not 100% sure what that's going to be yet. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Happy
Bye,
Thanksgiving.
all.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.